Okay, so the next topic is the pipe. The pipe is very important concept because if you look at the textbook written in R, the many textbooks actually use this concept of pipe, and so that's why I like to really discuss this the pipe, the concept of pipe. So the pipe, right? The pipe is control the logical flow of our code. The pipes are written as this percent sign and then what is greater, right? And then percent sign. So this is the symbol for the pipe. And they are provided by this package. I think it's called, it's pronounced Magritte, right? Package. And which is loaded as a part of the Tidyverse, right? So for example, okay, so here's the idea. Idea is basically, okay, they're using this pipe, right? This pipe concept. Okay, now let's take a look at this. Okay, let's take a look at this the command, right? So this command is quite complex and it's hard to read, right? So to resolve this issue, they're using the concept of pipe. Okay, so for example, so let me use a pen. Okay, so you know that it's first. This is kind of nested, command, right? So for example, when you look at this select, right? This output of the select function is going to be used as the input for the table, right? And then output of this entire thing is going to be what? The input for the prop table, right? So that's going to be input for the prop table. Okay, so the way it works is, okay, so first of all, this vehicle, right? I mean, starting from the beginning, the very beginning, this vehicle is the input for the select functions, and then output of this select, right? Output of this select is going to be input for the table, and output of this table functions, right? This entire table functions, so entire thing is going to be input for the prop table, right? So the same thing. So this is a pipe. Pipe means that the vehicles, right? The vehicle will be the input for this select functions, right? And entire output is going to be the input for this table functions, right? And entire output of whole thing. Okay, you know what? Let me just use different color for this. So this entire, right? Entire, result, right? So basically a table is going to be input for the prop table. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, so you know what? This way it's much easier, right? To read the command. Like, if this many nested, right? You see that it's nested, right? Sometimes it's very hard to interpret your code and you can make the mistake, right? Of course, the simple way is, every time you can use a variable. Let's say R1 and R2 and R3. So you can use a variable to simplify your expression, but in generally, this is really neat way of expressing this, right? Basically the same thing, right? So now let's just run this code. Okay, so hold on. Okay. So, okay, you know what? Let's just write it down. So this is important. So you know the vehicle, right? The vehicle is the variable, right? The vehicles, right? So this is data frame. And this data frame is going to be input, right? This input for the function called select. Remember, we use the vehicle. You know that vehicle is the input, right? So basically the input for the first argument, the major argument. So usually the major one, it's, the first one, right? If you have the many arguments, right? The major one is always the first one, right? So this vehicles, right, is going to be the input function for the select, and that's why I use the pipe, right? The select, right? And then we use this. We're gonna look at the what? Basically, we're gonna look at the we're going to look at the class, the column, right? So select class. And by the way, you don't have to put the comma, okay? It's the vehicles, right? This is going to be automatically the first argument for the select function, as you can see, the vehicles, right? Okay, then this entire output, right? So this entire output is going to be the function for the table. Can you see that? Okay, even for this, I mean, for even more readability, sometimes they use this as a next line. You see that? So basically it means the vehicle is going to be the input for the select functions, and this is like the second argument of the class. And then this entire expressions, right, the output is going to be input for the table. So what you have to do it is what? The pipe, right? And then what is a pipe? It's a table, right? Okay, so table functions, and entire output, right? This result is going to be the input for the prop table. Okay, so I need to use what? And then this is going to be prop table, right? Okay, so basically the same result. Let's just run this. Okay, the same result. Okay. And now, so basically just read this. Pipe allow us to forward the output of one expression as an input to another expression, right? In this example, we use the pipe forward vehicles data as an input to the select verb. Then we use another pipe to forward the output of the select verb as input to the table functions. Finally, we forward the output of table function to the prop table functions, right? Basically, this is the expression. Okay. The next one, we're gonna learn another function called the filter. The filter command allows us to specify the logical condition for the row that we intended to keep. So basically, this is what? This is a row slicing or the row subnetting. Okay. So this is what? This is row subnetting. Not a subnetting, subsetting. Sorry. And then it's slicing. Right? We learn about the subsetting and slicing, right? And previous examples, I mean, in the previous lecture, in our main textbook, we use subset function, right? And just in case if you don't, okay, but anyway, so let's first follow this example. The filter, okay, so basically they're using Okay, they're using what? The vehicle, right? Vehicle as an input, so this data frame, right? And then what? This one, right? So the vehicle is going to be input for the function for filter, right? Filter. By the way, if you don't know, if you want to learn more about the filter functions, then you can type filter, right? So you have to use the deploy functions, but anyway, okay. Anyway, the filter, right? The filter, the vehicle is gonna be the first function, right? I mean, first argument, and the next argument is like a logical expression. So the drive, right? You know what? So let's just take a look at this. The vehicles, right? Let's take a look at this. The driver, right? In the drive, you see the drive column, right? So either like a four-wheel drive, you have a two-wheel drive, and etc. Right? So you have a four-wheel drive, right? And like you have a rear-wheel drive and two-wheel drive, and etc. But basically, you want to basically subset, right? What you want to have is the row that which basically whose value drive is what? Equal to two-wheel drive, right? So that's something that you want to filter, or that's something you want to subset, right? So basically you want slicing out the rows, which have this this value, right? Two-wheel drive, right? As in like in the driver column, right? You see the driver column, right? Two-wheel drive, okay? So let's just go back to our code. Okay, so now what? Hold on, where is my code? Okay, good. So you have to have provide a logical expression, right? Logical expressions. You know what? Okay, so before we do that, you know what? Let's just use the let's use. I mean, I'm not gonna use the pipe concept. Okay, instead, you know, just for now, filter is a new function. So I'm not gonna use the but the filter. I mean, I'm not gonna use the pipe, right? So for example, let's say filter, right? So the first argument is the data frame, which is a vehicle, right? The vehicles, and then the logical expression is drive is equal to what? And 2, and then a capital letter wheel, right? This is a capital, right? It's not a lowercase, it's uppercase. Wheel, and then space drive, right? Good. Okay, so basically that's it, right? The filter. And let's just run this. Oh, the vehicle. Misspelled vehicle. Vehicles. Good. Okay, good. So how many rows I have? 481s, but you know, I have this, you know, this is result, right? So this is like a basically a row slicing, right? This is a row slicing, right? And what are the expression we learned so far? I mean, there's two more ways, right? Two additional ways. We learned the subsetting, right? So we can use subset, right? We learned this, right? Subset, and then what is the data frame? Vehicles, right? Vehicle. And then logical expression is this. So basically the same thing, right? Paste. Good. Misspells. I hate this. Okay. Good. So what is the additional way? I mean, this is very basic expression, right? So we have a vehicles, right? Misspells. Okay, we have a vehicles, and then what? I'm gonna use a square bracket, right? And then we can have what? We can have the Boolean expression, right? But you know that this vehicle is a 2D array basically, right? So we have a row and column. So the first field is a row, and then second field is a column. But let's say I want to see every column pretty much, so I'm gonna leave it as a blank. And then now the row side, right? Row field. I have to have a vectors of logical, so true and falses, right? So the drive is equal to this, right? So the vehicles. Okay. And then what is the column name? The the drive, right? And it's equal to copy and paste. Okay, right? So let's just run this. Okay, so basically you know that this is what? We have 3 different ways, but today we're gonna focus on the filter. So I'm gonna just comment this out, just since this is basically this subset and this expression is basically the review, right? So since this is a new one, I'm gonna just focus on the filter. But I want you to know, I mean, you should know that there are 2 additional ways, right? Okay, so basically this is what we learned this from. Okay, anyway, okay. So the filter, right? Okay, so but this is okay, right? But if you want to use what? And then what? And then if you want to find the CO2, right? The carbon emissions. right, of the two-wheel drive, of course you can use what? If you don't use a pipe concept, you can use a select, right? And then this is gonna be the data frame, and then what you want to have is a CO2, right? Emissions and etc. Right? So if you don't really use this, if you don't use the, if you don't want to use the pipe concept, but let's say you use the pipe, okay? So I'm gonna use a pipe. So first I have the vehicles, right? So this is gonna be input for this filter functions. So now I'm gonna use pipe. Right? So you have to use what? The vehicles. Right? The vehicles. And then the symbol for the pipe is %, the greater, and then %, right? And then filter, right? And then the vehicle is going to be input for the filter, and then the second argument is this one, right? So let me just copy the paste. Okay, so entire output is going to be input for the select functions, right? And then select functions, and then I would like to see the last column, right, which is CO2 emissions. So if you look at the data, right, last column is the CO2 emission. You see that, right? The CO2 emissions, right? So that's the column that I like to see, CO2 emissions. Okay. So go back to my code, and then what? The CO2 emissions. Okay, right? And then finally, I like to see the summary of this. I like to see the descriptive statistics of this column, right? Basically, I like to see the CO2 emissions of the two-wheel drive, right? So I'm gonna use the summary functions, right? So the entire result is gonna be input for the summary functions, right? So okay, and then summary functions. Okay, so basically that's it. And then now let's just run this. Good. So this is like a CO2 emissions of the two-wheel drive. Okay. Okay, so thank you. So I'm done with this up to this point, right? So we basically learned about, in this lecture, our main point is, right, main topic are the pipe, right, and filter, right? And then I want you to know this on the additional expression. This is review, right? Okay, thank you.